pardon my French, but it is a simply wacko time out there. If there's one thing that I've noticed as of late, it's that one, I have a lot of friends who are unemployed or on the job hunt, sending in literally hundreds of applications trying to score their next move. Or two, the other category of my friends are underemployed. And by that, I mean the job or jobs plural that they do aren't making enough to sustain them comfortably on a consistent basis. But oftentimes, because of that time commitment, there isn't a lot of available space to seek out better opportunities or up their skill sets. Tale as old as time, right? A young 20-somethings plot. To some degree, yes. But it's very interesting because we are seeing overwhelming reports that the economy is broadly positive. GDP is doing great. It's a superstar, in the words of The Atlantic. I could go on and on about how people are struggling to get jobs, period, but that's another story. TLDR, I think there's like a lot of issues with ghost jobs, the recruitment process, and also what online hiring looks like now that introduces a global hiring pool. But even if you do get hired, and that's a big if, depending on what you're going for or what sector you're aiming towards, one job alone is simply not enough. I think that can explain why unemployment rates are relatively low, because I don't think that rate factors into whether or not your job has a sustainable, comfortable wage that you can live on alone, whether that job provides health benefits that are critical to many people, or retirement options, which are most definitely not a given. I think as we've seen in all different types of media, and maybe just a growing sense of polarization or specialization, depending how you look at it, the way that we get and keep jobs is fractured. And so the way that we measure that retention is no longer fitting. Hi, I'm Kate. I love to complain. And if you're new here, I would love to hear your thoughts on anything and everything. But yeah, if for whatever reason you are in this position, or you just want to be a little sadder, I highly recommend checking out Reddit r/layoffs, because it's fascinating and very active. And I think the title of this Reddit post really summarizes what I'm trying to draw attention to. As this user ProudPie2731 says, which is best, permanent job with little less salary or unstable job with good salary? The way I interpret that is something with more security, but maybe less of a payoff, or missing some of the critical benefits that you might need in your life, or opting for something more volatile like freelancing, or trying to stitch together multiple different types of jobs to check all of the boxes that you're looking for. I think a lot of this is due to the economy correcting itself from all of the volatility that came from the pandemic. I am not in finance. I have no training or education. So obviously this is just my opinion. I mostly just want to talk about this with people who are noticing the same thing. But during the pandemic, we saw interest rates lower. We saw an injection of cash into the system. Because of that, it was so cheap to borrow money that we didn't have. And I think that extends to everything. A lot of people lost their jobs, but I think a lot of people were kind of thriving, at least in a job sense, during this period, because companies could take more risks, right? They could borrow more money and hire more employees and see what happens, see if that actually moves their bottom line. As a freelancer, I've worked for a number of startups, and it became so cliche that some of these startups would disappear in a number of months. I guess that's true of all times, but I started asking in my interviews, like, how much runway do you have? If I'm going to commit myself to you, how much runway, how much money do you actually have before you have to borrow more or go out of business? And I got, sometimes I would get pushback from asking that question as like a copywriter or someone who's just going to help do marketing for them. But I think it's valid, because even today, it's surprising how many companies are not doing as well as you would expect when you pull back the curtain, or even how many companies aren't profitable. Period. So we were in a bit of a mirage, right? I mean, the government was trying to keep us going during a huge time of uncertainty. So I can understand the reasoning behind the environment that was created. I think people also got a taste of work from home, which now it's kind of considered standard or at the top of people's list, which makes sense. I mean, who would have thought once you let people get the same amount of work done, potentially, hopefully, and see their loved ones more on a regular basis, that they would like that. So our expectations of what a standard job should look like are shifting. We also saw just a boom in content in particular. I feel like, understandably, a lot of software as a service businesses were doing really well because everyone was online and needed online support. We also saw the romanticization of just tech jobs, period. I still get YouTube videos like, what's my day like at Google, day in the life, which I don't feel like I've searched for. And that's all fine and dandy, if that's where your talent and your skill set is, that is fantastic. But inevitably, we cannot all have jobs where we work from home. And I'm one to talk, right? I am someone who most of the time works from home. There's some times where I'm on site or helping, maybe like once a week. I go in and help one of my particular clients with something in person. But I think I got a bit of a leg up. I started my freelance journey in 2019. During that time, I was able to get a bunch of, albeit not great, but I was able to get a lot of jobs and reviews under my profile, which really helped snowball into me being able to become a freelancer. But I think ever since people got a taste of work from home and started just reconsidering their priorities, I feel like a global pandemic will do that to you. I've had so many more people ask me how I made that transition and seem to have a real interest in it. And one thing that I will say is that it's really easy to fall in love with the idea of being your own boss. I am still in love with this idea, but I think it's very easy to confuse time flexibility with overall sustainability, with where you're at in your career, how much you're making relative to where you live. I think many of us, myself included, can jump onto an opportunity or jump to working from home or freelance or doing more things that align with our passions far too quickly, hoping that energy will eventually convert into something that's more sustainable. But I don't think that's the case for most people. And maybe just, a lot of us are jaded of the typical structure, especially now that we have the tools to where we can feasibly work from home. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? Taking us to today, the pandemic has, more or less come and gone, but we're starting to feel more of the interesting consequences that come from its aftershocks. People seem to have a harder time getting jobs, even though gross domestic product or GDP is high. And real quick, let's define the term. So GDP measures economic activity and national prosperity. If GDP is rising, the economy is considered to be in solid shape and the nation is moving forward. But a lot of people are saying that GDP is not a reliable source of economic security because it's only really factoring in economic activity, right? So there's this idea of the broken window fallacy, which says that obvious destruction can create false signals of rising prosperity. So what does that mean? It means that if something bad happens, like a natural disaster, a war, a huge event that affected us all, these events that usually imply that a significant portion of the population is suffering in one way or another, generates the need for certain services and products. And so that need is counted the same as if something was innovated and people just wanted to buy a product, right? I'm probably oversimplifying it. Again, I don't know what I'm talking about. Some people have advocated for this measure to be replaced with something called GPI, which takes two other essential questions into play, which are what portion of that activity is actually making us better off? What portion of that activity is likely to be sustainable over the long term? To me, this says that we really need to look at wealth distribution. Unsurprisingly, those who already had stocks or continue to invest in various assets are doing great because according to GDP, according to S&P, economic activity is high. Something that's interesting is that we're seeing a lot of tech companies have huge layoffs, which is interesting, but still have really positive increasing earnings report. And I always wonder, are they just more profitable because they're not paying as many people? I think everyone anywhere doing anything with money or having an interest in how money flows and how that relates to jobs has always been suspicious of when the sky is going to fall at some point. So it's easy to look at any piece of data and be like, oh, the sky is falling. But it seems like there's some level of distortion, right, between what we're seeing and what's actually happening on the ground. And these measures of economic efficiency that we're using at Broad really, as I said, benefit people who have stocks. But those who don't have investments for whatever reason are bound to struggle. White families have more money in retirement accounts, in stocks, period. And although more people than ever, about 62% of the United States own stock now, the top 1% still holds 50% of stocks, while the bottom 50% of US adults hold only 1% of the stocks. And that is a huge problem. It may seem like I'm talking about two different things, but I think it's interconnected to work in that there are plenty of jobs that need people, primarily those that require some level of manual labor. But these aren't likely to be the jobs that provide comfortable wages. And so people are led to get multiple jobs, which even then aren't always enough. And, forget about including any sort of stock option as a part of having that job. And then I do think financial education and the barriers around it has a profound impact. If you don't know about these things, how are you supposed to get into it? I think some of the language around investing is intentionally confusing. And many investments have a barrier to entry, which could be $1,000, it could be a couple $1,000s, which is a lot. For someone who's struggling to make it from one paycheck to the next. Something that, I think is so simple and probably fundamental that I just recently wrapped my head around as someone who's interested in these sorts of things is that if you're not investing in, our current system, your savings rate or, the amount of interest that you'll earn from putting your money in a savings account or worse, just having it sit in a checking account will not outpace that of inflation. So if you aren't investing in something with a higher rate of return than inflation, you're actively losing money over time. What? I feel like it's so wild that they don't tell you about that. And it's no wonder so many people are struggling to retire, let alone save, let alone buy a house when, it's not clearly defined and laid out like, hey, you need to do this thing or it's going to be incredibly hard to truly save and prepare yourself for your future. Without investing or having access to something with this level of interest, it's extremely unlikely that you're going to get ahead, bearing that you run into like a spontaneous windfall. You might be able to get a job right now, but it probably isn't the job you want, depending on what you're interested in. Or you might be able to get a job right now, but we've shifted to a culture where there's a lot more personal responsibility on preparing for your future, a la retirement, pension situation, savings, etc. I think sometimes in the name of being your own boss, you have to sacrifice a lot of those things that I think are unspoken heroes for many prior generations. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I would love to hear your experience with any and all things. I am learning. And yeah, I will be grumpy later about something else, I'm sure. Bye.